Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 20th, 2025. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Dr. Scott Lafontaine and Dr. Christian Schubert from the University of Arkansas talk about their research into using rice to improve the character of non-alcoholic beer. The research indicates that not only is the flavor of the product improved using rice, but the fermentation time is decreased as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing, and many thanks to everybody who was helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. And many thanks to the new Patreon subscribers who are signing up every week. Your help is very much appreciated. Financial supporters will see an early release later this week of the new episode. The next video, it's Steve's turn this time as we taste his Kveik Pale Ale that he added some citrus and spice to. That was a delicious beer. Financial supporters will also get the recipe. There are a bunch of recipes on our Patreon thingy now, and it's practically an online recipe book. Next week, I'm planning to get together with Matt Giovanisi of Brew Cabin and Swim University and Josh Secor of Gambit Brewing to formulate the recipe for my next Masher Luck beer. If you'll remember, I rolled very high ABV, high bitterness, pale, lager with UK influences. So I could do another malt liquor, essentially. However, I want to try to feature some UK hops fairly prominently and make it more interesting. Since it is a high-alcohol lager, I could also brew a smaller beer first and use that yeast cake to brew the bigger beer. So Matt and Josh and I could be formulating two beers next week. I've been telling you that our friends and sponsors at Imperial Yeast are releasing a trio of lager strains from 3 different continents. Well, the first is from North America. Imperial L51 Never is a Canadian strain. Imperial says L51 Never delivers crisp, clean lagers that honor the independent brewing traditions of Canada. Fermenting exceptionally well at cooler temperatures, this true North, glorious, and free lager strain is ideal for brewing a variety of styles, including easy-drinking adjunct lagers. Sounds right up our alley. L51 Never produces well-rounded beers with a subtle malt foundation, moderate ester character, and a clean malt-forward finish. Because some things, like Canadian beer, should always stand on their own. Never's alcohol tolerance is listed at 9%, so is that high enough for Adam to consider it very high? We'll see. You know we love Imperial yeast with 200 billion cells in each easy-to-open package. My stir plate is usually dusty because they don't make starters anymore for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches of ale. And for the smaller starter lager this time, I'll probably just pitch from the packet. Ask your local homebrew store to stock up on L51 Never from Imperial Yeast and keep an eye out for the 2 more lager strains in the next few weeks. Okay, more and more people, it seems, are turning to non-alcohol beers, and it's a challenge to brewers to brew them so drinkers won't miss the booze. Well, Scott Lafontaine and Christian Schubert say rice may be the answer to help with that challenge. Scott Lafontaine, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
It's great to be back.
We've got someone extra with us this morning. Who have we got with us?
We've got Dr. Christian Schubert, who's a postdoc fellow in my lab. And I'll let him introduce himself and his background.
Okay. Hey, thanks for having me within your podcast. I'm Christian. I'm from Germany. I'm holding a PhD and I'm doing currently my postdoc in Dr. Lafontaine's lab. I'm a trained brewer and maltster. I also studied brewing and beverage technologies in Berlin and at the Technical University in Berlin, and I also had done my PhD studies at the Technical University in Berlin in cooperation with with a company I'm currently working in, which is the VLB in Berlin, a research and teaching institute for all beer and beverage related topics.
Wow, welcome. And Scott, I guess I should let you introduce yourself more fully. We talked back in May, but refresh us who you are.
Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor in the food science department here at the University of Arkansas, and I specialize sort of in food chemistry and particularly brewing science. I got my PhD at Oregon State University, working a lot on hop aroma and flavor. Did a postdoc at the University of California, Davis, characterizing factors influencing non-alcoholic beer flavor and consumer preference, and then did a Humboldt Fellowship at the VLB in Germany, working sort of on a range of products or projects looking at beer flavor stability. And that's where I got to, befriend and meet Christian.
Scott, last time you and I got together, we talked about malting rice. And, you guys are working with the University of Arkansas, and Arkansas is the major rice producer in the United States. So you kind of have an interest in studying rice. But why is rice so attractive in talking about this subject? We're going to be talking about rice and NA beers. Why did you want to look at rice in particular in producing non-alcoholic beers?
So I think, first of all, just rice in general, it's a lens issue around how we see rice as brewers in the U.S. And we're gonna paint the picture first. So in the brewing industry, when it started to get founded and set up, the raw material quality wasn't great, right? So brewers had citral barley, was high in protein, and to make beers that the German immigrants were trying to make beers that were similar to the homeland, and they couldn't. So what they had to do, they had to dilute that protein down. And so over, time, like addition to rice to beer, we call rice an adjunct, right? It's labeled as that. And that has made it seem like the addition of rice is because brewers are doing it because it is cheap, but it's not, right? It provides all these great flavor attributes that we forget about. It's got, neutrality if you want it there. It's got the ability to affect fermentation. And so the thought of this was a lot of people were putting a lot of mechanical efforts into designing NAD. So you can design NAD where you're using biological techniques, where you're trying to use limited fermentation. And then you have NAD techniques where you can remove the alcohol, you make a full strength beer, remove the alcohol. And both of those sort of impact flavor in different ways. But one of the we were hearing, some of these mainstream beer companies making these non-alcoholic beers that have been popularized. They were making full strength, these NABs that they weren't happy with the profiles with, and they had characteristics that we didn't like. And so I'm going to set that up for Christian to talk about as we get into later on. But one of the thoughts that I had was really cool with having Christian sort of work on this project is he sees brewing through the Reinheitsgebot, the purity law. And I think, I guess my opinion as we evolve as brewers is that, yeah, we have these legal definitions and they define how we think about beer, but it's really important to see the raw ingredient and the potential of the raw ingredients that you're using. And to me, that's sort of like the essence of the Reinheitsgebot. Yeah, we want to make sure that beer is pure, but, grain-based beverages have been made for, centuries, millennia, like as long as humans have been around. And you look in Asia, there's beer-like beverages that were made with millet and rice for a very long time. So that's sort of the impetus and the intro. It was more around what did rice sort of bring to the profile of NAs because we hadn't seen that yet, and we can get into that as we keep going.
And I guess we should make a definition. We're talking about NA beers or non-alcoholic beers, but we're not talking about alcohol-free beers, right?
Yes, that's correct. In this study, we were using a special yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and that yeast is going to ferment some alcohol. So it's not the designation in the U.S. is um, zero point 0.5, so under zero point 0.5 ABV, it would be designated as alcohol, non-alcohol, and under zero point 0.05 is alcohol free. And it's really hard to get to that 0.05 unless you're using vacuum rectification or distillation
Right.
or some membrane treatment.
Yeah. So, Christian, first of all, was it a mental hurdle to get past the Reinheitsgebot and and to be brewing with rice?
Well, I mean, basically, as Scott said, rice is a value raw material as all others we are using too. And still, it's a little bit different from my background and from what I know or what I'm normally doing. Because I mean, if you're using rice, at a certain point, you also need to include certain enzymes which are helping to break down some of the biomolecules, like which are not in the rice. So you have to add them in. Both are factors I know in theory, but I've never worked with. So I wouldn't say it was a hurdle. It was more like a first, yeah, I don't know how to phrase this, but it was more like getting in touch with it and getting more comfortable with using both of those raw materials, like the enzymes as well as the rice. But I mean, it's a complete neutral perspective from my point of view because I'm working in the industry for a few years now, and I'd also worked with like global brewers, so it's not that hard for me, but it's really interesting. It's more getting more in touch with those procedures and how to see the production, especially from a non-German perspective now in the US, is really fun. Yeah.
It's good to open your mind a little bit.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So Christian, talk about the parameters of the experiment. When I talked to Scott before, we were talking about malting rice. In this experiment, you weren't using malted rice. So how much of a percentage, how much of a range of a mixture did you add the rice? As I understand from reading the experiment or the results, you went all the way from 0 rice to 100% rice. Is that true?
Correct. So the basic background of this investigation, to explain this, had been certain off flavors. So as Scott was saying, um, when you're producing non-alcoholic beers with a certain technique, you will also have certain flavors that are not that common in full strength normal fermented beers. If you're using a different yeast strain, you will have a different flavor profile of the product. So what the brewers and consumers are looking for is a replacement of their flagship of their core product with a non-alcoholic product, um, which is the hardest task because replacing a product that had been in the market for decades is quite hard.
Mm-hmm.
So when brewers are going to try to launch a new product, especially smaller brewers, they need to invest a lot of money in downstream processing. So like this, getting rid of the ethanol by technical or by technological installations, or you can also try to set up the beer with, as I said, a different yeast strain to get to the low or no or like to the no or low alcoholic beers. And when you're doing this, you will have certain flavor compounds that are related to the malt use and to the amount of malt use. So if we know that those flavor compounds are in the malt, our expectation had been if we're reducing the amount of malt use, we might also reduce those flavor compounds. Those flavor compounds are aldehydes that are normally linked with brewers say a worty characteristic. So you gotta some of them are adding more grassy green or also like sometimes cardboard in aged beers, worty or also grain-like flavors, and that's something the consumers are not looking for. So what we thought is if we are reducing the amount of barley malt used, we might also be able to reduce those off-flavor compounds by using rice, which offers a more neutral flavor. So, and this is why we tested 0% of rice as having a reference up to 100% rice to check if we are able to get a product that might match certain consumer expectations.
So it's getting a balance of, I
Yes.
guess, if you're saying worty, would we homebrewers think of that as sort of an unfermented kind of taste? Would that
Correct.
be a
Yeah,
good?
and that's exactly what those beers normally taste like. So with my or like with a or from a more European German perspective, beers, non-alcoholic beers are um, for decades on the market. So brewers do produce them with different techniques. One of the really common techniques is like the use of arrested fermentation. Like you're stopping the fermentation at 0.4, 0.45 ABV to be below those zero point 0.5 legal requirements. You can also use, as I said, the different yeast strains, or you can use techniques to like get rid of the ethanol, or you can mix it. And all of them do have certain drawbacks that can or that we try to overcome in the first step by using the different rice and barley malt percentages to balance the product on a more suitable consumer taste.
And just on the 100, say for example, the 100% rice beers, what were your sensory panel participants telling you about the flavor characteristics of that beer?
Well, a basic aspect or like a basic information is that we are not using like rice as it is used in the brewing industry. So we had used a single breed rice variety in those tests, and the rice we have used is a so-called Aroma 22, which is an University of Arkansas breed, and that's a flavor rice, so a jasmine style or jasmine type rice. So this rice also offers other opportunities for different flavors in the beer. So we use the Aroma 22 as it is an Arkansas breed, and we are with the University of Arkansas. And this rice, as it is jasmine-like, is driven by a more vanilla-like and or milky creamy flavor, which is a characteristic of this rice and of aromatic rices in general. So by using 100%, this had been the descriptors the panels also had marked on, like a more creamy vanilla like flavor in the beer.
And so you could manipulate that. It seems like if you use different varieties of rice, you could
Yes.
manipulate the different characteristics that you get.
Yes, that's the thinking we have. So our suggestion is by using different rice varieties, you can design your NAB different. And if you're using a non-flavor or non-jasmine style rice, you can also get a much more, I wouldn't say plain, but a much more
Nu-
basic
Neutral?
yeah, neutral, yeah, a much more neutral flavor impression on this beers too.
Now, Scott, of course, any of us who have used rice uh, in brewing are or wheat or any of the kind of stickier grains, are kind of wary of the performance characteristics in the mash tun. How did you guys, especially if you're going like 100% rice, what methods did you use to make sure that you could get the efficiency that you wanted?
So all that Christian get into the brewing aspect, I just want to jump in here too and sort of like challenge. I think part of what we're doing is challenging what this prevailing notion is of rice. And um, I think like a lot of people don't realize that there's this complexity of all these different varieties that bring something to the table. You can get this differentiation with rice variety just like you can with barley variety. And then the same thing is there. Like if you want to, you can use it as we have been using it in the country with is like or in primarily in brewing with that neutrality, which is why we need it in this case because we have that negative off flavor in the NAB that we're trying to dilute. So in terms of the overall brewing, I'll kick that over to Christian, but this is why we were trying to think of some novel enzyme as well.
Hmm.
So we use some exogenous enzymes, which I'll let Christian talk about. Um, and it was hard because originally the first mash we did, I don't think we treated it as hard as we needed to. So the efficiency wasn't that great. But the thing about NAD is we're not trying to be not necessarily like we want to be careful with our ingredients, but we weren't being we can be a little bit less efficient, right? The goal is not to create alcohol. The goal is to create a product that tastes,
Right.
you know.
So, Christian, talk about the challenges working. I mean, again, we're not talking about a malted product, and we're talking about a product that's tends to be sticky. So how did you work with it?
Yeah, so that's true. So when working with rice, you have to add certain steps in your brewing regime. As rice do have a higher gelatinization temperature, and this gelatinization temperature, we have seen this in certain tests we had done in the lab. The gel temp can range from in the range of barley gel temps up to I've seen reference with saying 90 degrees Celsius. So
Mm,
you've got quite a range. So first thing, as you talk about sticky, we try to overcome this stickiness, like the gelatinization, by pre-boiling the rice. So we used rice as you can like buy it. It's milled, polished rice, which can be used in the kitchen or as we use it in a brewery. But in this case, you have to pre-gelatinize it, pre-boil it at a higher temperature compared to the barley. So, and as there are no or like a much lower amount of enzymes in the rice, there are still enzymes in the rice, but not in the amount we needed in the brewery. You will deactivate those enzymes as well. And in this case, to make it better to handle in the brewery, you could add exogenous enzymes, which are also heat stable. So that's also a common technique in the brewing industry, and there's nothing wrong with this. So those are often purified enzymes or special enzyme blends that are used for certain brewing topics. Um, and we used we used different enzymes. One had been a thermostabile enzyme we added in this boiling or in this pre-gelatinization to break down the starch initially. Like it is heat stable, we can heat it up to 90 or 95 degrees Celsius, and the enzyme is still active. And this gives us the opportunity to have a first breakdown of the starch of the molecules And then after the gelatinization, we are starting with our normal meshing regime, which had been a adapted one for a higher maltose content in the wort, as the yeast we had used, the Saccharomyces ludwigi, is not able to ferment maltose. We are trying to increase the amount of maltose in the wort to lower the fermentation activity, and by this to lower the ethanol that is produced. So after pre-gelatinization, the rice, we mashed it together with the other grist load, so with the leftover, which is basically barley malt. And by increasing the amount of rice, as we are reducing the amount of barley malt use, we also reduce the husks, or like the husk amount in the overall brew, which can lead to issues with the lautering process. So our or what we had done is to use rice husks as well. So they are easy to add. We use 10% of the overall grist load, added this to still have the lauter ability after meshing. And then we just got into our like meshing both together into our standardized meshing regime. And after this pre-gelatinization and this combined mesh, the rest of the brewing process is nearly the same as it is in a standard Pilsner or infusion. I mean, it's kind of a decoction, but more like getting into an infusion meshing. Then yeah.
So once you've collected your wort, it's the same. It's
yes, correct.
Just getting the wort out of the mash tun.
Yeah, it's more like adjusting the sugar profile in a way you're looking for to reduce the amount of ethanol produced, but also giving the yeast some sugar for their metabolism and to produce. And this is what Scott said. We are not going into the ethanol production, but we still need those fermentation byproducts. Higher alcohol, some of the esters that are produced. So a fermentation is necessary to get certain beer or beer-like compounds in the non-alcoholic product, but not in the amount as it is correlated with like ethanol production in normal fermentations.
And you also used a good friend of rice, historically. You used Koji in your process as well.
Well, not in the process. This had been a side stream of this, as I'd said. What we're currently doing in brewing is using exogenous enzymes. So enzymes that are a certain blend or purified enzymes. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with this. I think that's a really straightforward and good application to have a focus on certain products that need to be produced and that need to be in the wort for your yeast metabolism. But as consumers are also aware of having more natural ingredients and having a more or like having links to a certain story behind the product. And we thought of why using exogenous enzymes only from this purified perspective. Why not trying to link or to bridge the historical Eastern technology? So Koji is mostly or is an aspergillus grown on certain starch containing materials. Basically, it's rice, or it could also be soybeans, and it is used in Asian cultures to produce all kind of fermented foods. And we are talking about foods in general, so soy sauce or kind of miso paste can be produced with this, but also soju or other like fermented alcoholic products. And we thought that Koji might be a good opportunity to have a still natural but high in enzyme product that can help with degrading those macromolecules in the meshing when using higher amounts of unmalted, in our case, unmalted rice, in using unmalted raw ingredients.
And I just want to hop in here too. So you might be like, Koji, where do I even get that? Well, we were working with a company called the Eda Group, and we learned about them because we have a great um, sake brewery that has established themselves as sort of a leader in the U.S., and that's Origami Sake. So, we started to get into this and get connected with some supplier groups. And so the Eda Group actually distributes two of their Koji varieties through, I think, more beer. They have a white and a yellow. And again, sort of I think, like fits into that definition of respecting what the raw ingredient can do, right? So we have we have rice. Either we can malt that rice. In our past discussion, we talked about how we get that enzymatic power just with the rice itself, or we can use koji, and we can use this traditional technique where we're taking this fungus and we're creating our enzymes needed for starch hydrolysis. So I think both sort of fit in that definition of respecting the raw ingredient, like from a production standpoint. Um, Actually led to some pretty surprising results. But you know, it's not necessarily, again, we're not trying to break down all this starch. And I just want to rewind a little bit because one of the things that was really exciting is sort of and this was an unintended consequence, but we were, with some of the enzymes that we were using, we were creating more glucose, more simple sugar, and Christian had already talked about this, but we need that fermentation profile, but we only need a little bit, right? Again, we're doing subtle fermentations. The secondary metabolism that yeast is creating makes the product beer-like and convinces us as consumers that we're drinking something that resembles the full strength product. But with the rice, what was happening is because we were creating a little bit more glucose, those fermentations were happening quicker, um, which is really interesting. As we go from 100% barley all the way to 100% rice, we were hitting the target for our ABV spec quicker. And from a practical standpoint, that's great because we turn those tanks quicker. And one thing with it, non-alcoholic beer production, and this is just something to keep in mind at home, is we've created environments where, Saccharomyces cerevisiae thrives. And a lot of times we are using sanitizers that don't necessarily clean the surfaces fully, right? We still have some of that yeast left behind. And so what we were having, and we see this in our brewery, trial brewery here at the University of Arkansas, even though you're trying to create these non-alcoholic beers, sometimes you get a cerevisiae infection,
Mm.
um, and that thing goes full strength. And so you just have to, and it's primed and ready to do that, right? Like you have all this maltose there, so you want to get through these fermentations as quickly as you can. So that I just wanted to put that in there because that was one really interesting finding out of this work. Is a little bit off topic, but getting to that fermentable substrate, you can either use this endogenous enzyme source, and that was leading to some glucose, or you can use this traditional kind of koji source. Um, and again, you had those two, the white and the yellow koji. So sorry, I digressed, but I thought that was interesting. Um,
No, I don't think it's a digression. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that fermentation time difference. If you're looking at creating sort of pilot projects to get the attention of professional brewers, you want to sell the advantages, and the length of fermentation time. It looked like to me was pretty dramatic in the reduction of time that rice took over traditional barley.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the key findings, and that's really important because if we're talking about NAB production and like NAB is a growing market, um, the brewers also are looking forward to increase their production capacity by faster fermentation, possibly because they do have the fermenter much quicker available again. So if they are using rice, and this is what we have found. So, and by increasing the amount, you're adding what we would say like simple sugars only. So the yeast do have a faster, straightforward fermentation, which also didn't took so long. So you should be aware of using or like of adjusting the grist bill by own or with not watching on your sugar spec. But if you got an eye on this, and if you do some more detailed analysis on this, you can definitely go into a faster fermentation by using rice. Yeah.
So what's the bottom line? It sounds like there are some things that you have to do on the front end as far as dealing with the gelatinization of the product and working with filtering adjuncts in the mash tun. But on the back end, it seems like there's some efficiency to be gained with a shorter fermentation time.
Yeah.
But what do the consumers think? What did your taste panels or your sensory panels think?
I mean, first, as the listeners might heard about this, the thing is we are not talking about redesigning a certain product, because this would affect the product in a way that it is not comparable with the initial like setup or design as it has been. We are talking about like if you're going into the market or if you're going to design a new product, rice can definitely be an opportunity in designing certain flavors, in increasing capacities, and also by having a more local and also, yeah, kind of price optimized product in your brewery. Um, some brewers, especially in the US, are using rice, so they know how to handle this. If you are not using rice yet, you might have to think about, I wouldn't say drawbacks, but about the challenges that can arise by using this raw material. But if you're aware of those challenges, there will be no issues in using rice as a quality raw material in the production of non-alcoholic beers. And the second aspect of your question had been, what are consumers saying? So we had used, or we used two panels in we had used two panels in those trials. So one had been in Arkansas, and one had been in the EU, so in Germany.
Hmm.
And it is interesting because we are going into two different markets. So as I said, Europe, especially Germany, got a longer history of non-alcoholic beers. Nearly every single brewery in Germany or like in the EU is offering a non-alcoholic alternative to their core products. While in the US, and I mean, that's historical, so the consumers are aware of certain flavor defects of flavors, or they are kind of trained on certain aromas that they don't like and that they link to non-alcoholic beers. While in the US, and that's the interesting thing, non-alcoholic beers are a much more increasing product in the beer market. But on the other hand, the US consumers do have more experience with beers that are brewed with, as brewers still call it, adjuncts. So corn, rice, maybe some simple sugars. So they are trained from a different perspective. So they know how a more that a product brewed with rice or with corn will have a more neutral flavor. So if you're introducing a full or an all malt NAB brewed with a maltose negative yeast on this market. And this is what we have seen. The consumers are saying, okay, it tastes worthy. So that's the general first impression. If you're using 100% barley with this yeast, you will have, or barley malt, sorry, you will have a worthy impression that is realized by the consumers. If you're increasing the amount of rice, as I said, there will be others, or especially with the rice we use, there are other flavor compounds that are dominating then. So we decrease the worthy amounts, but increasing other flavors. So the chemical perspective we presented is also underlined by our consumers. And interestingly, what we have found is that consumers in the EU do prefer the beers with 70% rice because the overall rice flavor is not that present. Well, the consumers in the US do prefer the 7% barley, but both are agreeing on a 50-50 blend. So there are two basic outcomes. So 50-50 blend is the way to go to if you're going into global markets by producing a single beer and you're importing or exporting it. So if a brewer is trying to set up a new product, 50-50 seems to be the way to go to cover more also international consumer preferences. And the other thing is what we found is exactly underlining what I said. So German or European consumers are aware of those wordy impressions. They know how a beer produced with arrested fermentation or different yeast strains or mixed procedures do taste, and that this sweety, worty, grain-like flavors are often linked to off flavors. They don't really like this. While the consumers in the US do link a certain, I would say, certain malty, worty impressions to a more beer-linked flavor, because they do know what a beer tastes like if we are talking about like kind of light beers that are often brewed with adjuncts. So I think the training, the historical aspect of your panels do have an impact on how they rate the beer. And by using different raw materials, you can definitely push the product in a certain direction to be more in line with the consumer preferences.
And I just want to hop in here too. These were not necessarily like full consumer panels where we ran these through 100 people. These were our trained panels, but you can get some like directionality with those panels. Like, so when you ask, like basically we'll use those panels to characterize the flavor profile of the different products. And this overlaps with work that I did in Davis. U.S. consumers don't necessarily, and this was on a larger, 50 product survey. U.S. consumers don't necessarily hit, like, brewers will give NAB with a wordy character a negative rating, but U.S. consumers are a little bit more accepting of that wordy character than I think brewers realize, at least in studies that we have. But obviously, reduction of that is super important, and rice plays a role in that. So some other things that I just want to bring up too is Christian is an expert in beer flavor stability, and has done a lot of great work on sort of IPA flavor. Probably has published the only publicly available study on IPA flavor stability. And one of the major findings in that work was that aldehydes play a role in beer flavor stability. And so one really important fact is as you reduce these compounds, you elongate the shelf life of your product. So while we didn't necessarily look at that in this study, it's quite likely that maybe some of these blends that have a higher percentage of rice are gonna make it through shelf life a little bit longer. Obviously, there's stuff that you have to, the grist bill is only one decision. You have your hop character that you have to make sure is stable as well. And some other decisions, but grist fill does have an influence on that shelf life piece. And a lot of brewers are struggling with that as beer is sitting on shelves for longer. So I think, that's one other thing that we're going to look at this year, and that's upcoming, but really important to consider that piece.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and it sounds like you've just started on your journey of taking a look at this process.
Well, and I think it's just making rice sexy again, it's a cool grain. And I just been really taken aback around like how much, yeah, to be honest, I joined the University of Arkansas 2 years ago. I didn't realize how much potential, like untapped potential there is in this grain. And I don't know why we haven't been looking at it. Like, Anheuser-Busch has been using rice and has been making great products for a very long time. They have their opinion around how this product should be used, but like there's there's so many ways that we could look at this grain and as a brewing industry, and I think there's a lot of potential left there to explore, particularly as we think about these different rice varieties. Like, so at the University of Arkansas, we have the USDA ARS station that houses the rice germplasm database for the U.S. And, we have some really exciting stuff coming up. Basically, with that malting project, as well as this, we've brought in about 300 different varieties from all around the world that we're growing out, we're malting. We'll look at like how much different extract, what is the variation in gel temp. And the thing is, there's rice varieties that gel down at like 60, which like Christian kind of was alluding to this, but you don't need a cereal cooker at that point. You can just infuse it with your barley if you want to do that.
Sure.
So, I mean, this credence to really characterizing and understanding what this raw material brings to the table, I can say characteristically, like, it's been really fun to learn thus far. And I think, we're, like you said, just scratching the surface. So, and this study being a great way to showcasing what that untapped potential is, again, with that usage of the aromatic variety, Aroma 22. I mean, it brings a really nice, subtle flavor to the non-alcoholic beer, and I think I'm pretty excited about the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by using those rice varieties, we are talking about rice varieties that had not specially been grown for the brewing industry. So we are talking about rice that is specially grown for certain food production, food processing. And if we are thinking about like other grains, especially barley, that has been grown for hundreds of years for a certain reason, and this reason had been brewing, if we are talking about like growing rice for this reason too, the opportunities are endless. Like what like special extracts, special flavors. You have pigmented rice, which can add certain colors to your product. So if we are talking about rice in the brewing industry, we should definitely focus on a more brewing related raw material as well, and not using like I wouldn't say the common rice, but a more specialized one. And this might also give farmers more opportunities to grow different rice varieties, or to have other potentials on their farms, to have or to get a different network to brewers and not only to rice processors.
It sounds like a win-win all around.
Yeah, I think so.
This has been fascinating. I hope that good luck on your continuing exploration of rice, as a brewing grain, and I hope that you'll keep us posted.
We will, and look forward to having you down and getting to try some products next time we talk.
Yes, please. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Many thanks to Scott and Christian. We had planned to get together in person but we kept running into scheduling issues, so we got together early in the morning over Zoom instead. I appreciate their being flexible, and I look forward to meeting over a beer in person, possibly an NA beer in the future. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. So until next time, until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.